Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the September 15th, 2022 edition of Collect Our Cousins, Engaging White People in the Struggle for Full Democracy. I'm Karen Fleshman, founder of Racy Conversations and of Collect Our Cousins. I created this weekly live stream to help white Americans like me become more effective in our conversations with white people in our lives, to help us build an embodied anti-racist white culture in the words of Resma Menachem. I'm featuring the people who inspire and teach me the most, like Tracie Jae and Michelle Emmanuelle. White Americans, the battle for our democracy will not be won in courtrooms or in the streets. It must be won in our living rooms, at our neighborhood meetings, school board meetings. As an anti-racist, collecting my cousins often falls to the end of my to-do list. Oh, I'll get to that next month. But I want to encourage everyone watching today to write a list of your friends and family you will collect this year. There are 21 million Americans, largely white, who believe that Donald Trump is the legitimate president and political violence may be necessary to restore him. And we are frontline in the effort not only to reach those folks, but to reach all the white folks who are neutral or in the middle or undecided and win them over to our side. And it's especially important that we do that so with 50 plus days left to the midterm election. With that in mind, I am so grateful that Tracie Jae and Michelle Emmanuelle are joining me on the show today. And I'd love for you to introduce yourselves and share a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I've been here before, so I'm going to defer to Michelle to kick us off.
You beat me. I was about to defer to you. Okay, I'll go. So my name is Michelle Emmanuelle. I am a wellness consultant, and what I do, what I focus on, is supporting organizations and individuals for burnout recovery. And basically, I call that program Empowering Resilience. And really, in regards to organizations, excuse me, my focus is to support organizations to put people first, because when people come first, the culture thrives. And the way I support my offering is in burnout recovery support, which really does impact the culture hugely. And I support organizations in helping them to integrate wellness rather than add it when it's mental health month. What about the other 11 months, or a particular week focus, of some kind of wellness focus, but really recognize that as individuals, as humans, wellness is something that's to be integrated in the culture, and it really helps people to feel more engaged, connected, and supported. So I also coach women of color for burnout recovery support as well. So that's me.
Love it. I have so many questions.
I am sure that if you have been here with Karen and me before, that you can recognize in Michelle's language how it is we found each other. My name is Tracie Jae. In business and in life, I am the quiet rebel. My work in the world is creating incremental and organic shifts to the status quo, using conversations as instruments for change. And these days, primarily as a human-centered equity coach, and human-centered equity is a framework that I created to disrupt what we've been calling diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it lands on the 5 tenets of honesty, urgency, meaningfulness, accountability, and nuance. Human.
Human. It spells human.
It spells human.
I love it. I love it. And so maybe that's a great place to start. How did you both land on centering humanity?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I find that centering on humanity is basically what's going to create unity and healing. I find that a lot of times when I've talked with individuals and organizations, and I defer to my friends and colleagues who are doing the justice, equity, diversity, inclusivity work. I'm more in the wellness realm. But I also recognize as I'm talking to individuals who've been part of those programs, how it's not necessarily hitting the mark, you know? And so I've found personally when I've been involved in those programs that I felt a little bit like it was othering, focusing more on our differences rather than our similarities. And for me, I feel like what's going to really help us to really heal and unite is recognizing that we're all humans first, And when I talk with organizations, that's what I try to focus on, in the wellness aspect is that regardless of the sector and the industry, it's always, always 100% going to be about people, period, And so that's why I focus on when organizations put people first, the culture thrives. And it's that connection that really helps people to thrive in the diversity and learning and being curious, not necessarily focusing so much on what's different. But even if we're focusing on that, there's a way of doing it in a lens of curiosity that doesn't create so much divisiveness and polarization, but opportunities to learn and to engage and to understand. Exactly, Karen.
I love it. I love it. And talk about burnout. The Black women who are diversity, equity, inclusion heads for their organization. And then, they're saying, hey, this needs to change and this needs to change. And the organization is looking at them like, what? We hired you to make us diverse and inclusive.
Yes, exactly. You're the cure-all. Ready, set, go.
and then the kind of burnout that produces for the women who are in that situation, it just breaks my heart.
Absolutely. It is heartbreaking, and that's why actually just within this past year, I shifted my focus of coaching just women of color, primarily because I understand the extra lift that it is to navigate the world in a different body than the dominant culture. And that's a big ask, And so my focus is to really support women of color in burnout recovery. And so that's really been important to me to help them to really find support from a person who gets it, And in the burnout that I talk about, what I tell organizations and the individuals is that there are more than 8 different types of burnout. And one of those types, I have to say, I actually made this one up. I not made it up, but I added this one, and it's specifically due to systemic oppression because
Mm.
there's nothing micro about aggression. The body responds, the nervous system still responds the same, regardless of whether it's, considered micro or not. Aggression is aggression to a person's nervous system. And that is, if there is a climate where there's systemic oppression, the people who are impacted by that are in greater need because they are more likely to experience stress, anxiety, depression, and burnout. So that's why I focus on women of color in my coaching, but also recognizing that in organizations, that's my lens of supporting, the work that Tracie and others do. I love to partner with them because it's like, for me, what I consider is like, I partner with people like Tracie who are doing the work because for me, it's about creating the capacity because people are burnt out and tired, And so it's like, yes, even if they're wanting to be change makers and really do something different, if they're just trying to survive and sleep well at night and, eat and, just trying to get through the day because they're so exhausted, the capacity for doing the important work is very minimal. So for me, it's about equipping people with a sustainable capacity so that they can be more engaged and consistent and sustainable in the practices that people like Tracie do in their work.
I love it. I love it. So much to talk about. And Tracie, share a little bit about how you landed on humanity.
Um, I could just say ditto, Michelle, but I'll add this. When we think about diversity as an objective, it usually looks like let's make space for people who haven't always been here.
Mm.
Right. And that's fine. And it's a noble goal. And I'm not turning my nose up at that goal. However, we've been trained to assess people based on a created construct, and to start with something, and I'm going to say superficial, like race, which might get me in trouble with some other folks, but that's okay. Because if we recognize that race is a construct that was created by people, then we can also uncreate it. Additionally, when we think about who is other, not any person that you know in your life is like you. So in that regard, we're all other. And so if we stopped thinking about this sort of macro other and thought about the micro other, right? Like every person in your family is somehow different from you. I like to do this exercise sometimes when I'm with groups. Think about the person, and I'm going to ask the both of you right now. Think about the person that you like the most in your life. Like they're your favorite person, they light you up. If you just pick one. If there's a list of folks like that, that's fine. Just pick one. And now think about all the ways that you are different from that person.
Mm.
I can easily come up with at least 5 or 6 ways that I'm different from the person that lights me up the most in the world.
Mm.
And does that make that person frightening? No. Does it make me not want to be with them? No. Does it make them less interesting? No. Does it make me not want to join with them in conversation? No. Right? Does it make me not want to hear their point of view? No.
Does it make them scary?
Does it make them scary? No. Except when we think about difference, when we think about other, we often go to that fear place first. And I would rather us go to a love place first.
Mm. This is reminding me of what Andre taught us, right? That our differences are not bad. Our differences are not to be feared or suppressed. They're to be embraced. They are a center for having fuller understanding and deeper movements and more power when we embrace our differences instead of running away from them.
Yeah. And also, like, life would be so boring if we were all the same.
Yeah, completely.
And our organizations would be stale and flat and not have any excitement to them, no creativity. We have to have some difference in order to have creativity, right? Like the most current buzzword, right, is innovation, right? Everybody's talking about innovating. How you gonna innovate if everybody's the same? How we
And
do
that's
that?
exactly what the science tells us, that diverse teams are more productive, are more innovative, are more financially lucrative, profitable, I guess is the right word I'm looking for, because of that. Because if everyone coming in to make a decision has the exact same lived experience and perspective, guess what? Their decision is not going to be very nuanced, those words that you just used, right? But if they're coming in with very different perspectives and arguing with each other, which is also nothing to be afraid of. Arguments is not bad. That it's in conflict that we can become more creative. I know growing up in a white family, it was like conflict. Oh no, conflict is to be avoided. Let's not express ourselves. And so it was really hard for me to develop the ability to speak up when I saw something happening or, had a different perspective. I had to learn how to do that. And I'm so grateful that I had amazing teachers who taught me how to do that and role models who showed me how to do that. But yeah, I love I love what we're talking about right now. Um, I wanted to also talk about um, the systemic. You said systemic oppression is a form of burnout. And Tracie, Tracie Jae, last time you were on the show, we talked about intergenerational trauma and how that relates. Could we talk a little bit about that?
Go ahead, Tracie. I'm going to defer to you this time.
So sort of building from there or starting from there, I've been doing some studying these days about learned behavior, and how there are some behaviors that we just wake up doing, right? We just know them, they're in our body, right? And then there are some behaviors that we learn as we go, right? They keep us safe. They help us navigate the world. So we go back to those behaviors because they're helpful. And I'm thinking about this idea of generational racism and generational trauma as both learned behavior and sort of then now I'm forgetting the other term now, but like that you're born with, right? Because it's been passed down to us in our DNA to some degree, and also it's reinforced in the ways we interact with one another.
Yes, I think, are you looking for the term epigenetics?
Perhaps, but
Yeah.
maybe not.
Yes, yes. And what I want to highlight is that this is also true for white people. We often think of that intergenerational trauma as being something that Native people, Black people, etc., are carrying, but we don't talk about how, as the oppressor, we also developed intergenerational trauma because we cannot inflict all of that violence without it also impacting on us. It's not the same form, it's a secondary vicarious form of trauma. But when we come into the workplace, I'm still carrying that. And so when I'm encountering Michelle and Tracie Jae in the workplace, it's not just the three of us, but it's the three of us plus all of our ancestors, and what my ancestors are whispering in my ear about what I need to do to assert myself in this situation so that I will never be held to account for all of the horrible things that my ancestors and I have done in our past. And I think that's the root of a lot of the um, horrible behavior of white people.
I think that's part of it, Karen. But also sometimes when we have these kinds of conversations and we mention ancestors, which are absolutely important to this conversation, we think that we're only talking about past tense things. And we fail to mention people who are currently alive, who are right now in our lives, who are still reinforcing all of those things. And, you know, it was passed down to them too. So they got it from somewhere, right? But it's not just ancestral, right? It is our grandparents and our uncles and our, cousins and kinfolks who are around us, our cousins, if you will, right? Who we are with every day, who we have to face when we don't live into what they believe is normal for us.
100%.
And so we're combating the things that our ancestors left us with, but we're also combating regular, everyday, one-on-one interactions with other humans in our lives who we often really love and care about.
And how do we start to shift the culture and be the cycle breaker that is going to change the dynamic so that our children have a very different understanding of how to be in the world?
Yeah.
I actually think that, in hearing both of what you're saying, Karen, you touched on a lot of referring back to your early question about why people centered, why human centered. And that's really the essence too. It's like you're talking about, it's not just a person of color thing, it's a person thing, it's a people thing, it's a human thing. We all have, when we're born, we actually carry the DNA of our ancestors, and we also carry the triggers, and it's been scientifically proven. So it's not just talk. I mean, there's actual data that is supporting this truth. And so in the wellness aspect, those triggers, they've literally shown something that they did, which I am not for, but it's the test that they did on rats, and basically shocking the rat in a particular way, and then putting a scent with it, and then actually later on, as the next generation had the same trigger, you know what I mean? And so they actually were able to like note that scientifically, like, oh wow, this is passed on, so some of the triggers that we as people have, we're not even aware of why we have that. It's just there. A lot of it's been survival, because as human beings, survival and belonging and safety, number one, right? And our sense of connection, super important. Our sense of value, very important. And when any of those areas are threatened, then there's what Tracie was talking about. I learned as like our conditioned response, conditioned behavior, and then, and physically that we may not even recognize, but that physical response actually translates into behavior, And so for me, I've studied both, but like I said, I'm staying in the lane of wellness, but also recognizing that in answer to your question, which I wasn't sure if it was rhetorical or not, in terms of how do we make the changes, I think part of it really is about creating that focus again back onto the people-centered, human-centered, and just recognizing that this isn't just a slice over here of you guys, this is your issue, you guys figure it out. This is a humanity problem, an issue and challenge, and something that we can together work through. And I think the thing that we can do is by being curious about, like back to Tracie's wonderful question about our favorite person, and I was thinking the person that I thought of, is a short redhead, Irish. We couldn't be farther apart in terms of the physicalities, but she's my favorite person. I love her, and so that's such a beautiful example, Tracie, in terms of like what connects us. And, and it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be, and even when it is, because frankly, sometimes things are scary about people. And sometimes there are differences where it's like, whoa, ho, 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 ideologies and belief systems and, behaviors that are just like super not aligned with our own particular sense of what we feel is correct or not correct, and within that still, it's just like there are tools in terms of like how we can actually access our curiosity in a way that's not going to be so polarizing, but helping us to understand one another. You know what I mean? The more we go, and stand on different sides of the line pointing at one another, the less there's going to be unifying and healing happening. And for me, when I bring in the wellness aspect, again, I try to focus on the fact that here's what's happening in our nervous system, period, human nervous system, and when I talk with organizations, a lot of times I'll tell them, it's like, I don't speak corporate, but I do speak people. You know what I mean? It doesn't really matter the CEO title or the whatever title the person has. Stress, I understand how it happens in a person's body. I recognize how when people are not being treated well, what happens to their nervous system. And here's an example regarding what you're talking about, the systemic oppression. And really, this is for anything, when we other, for whatever the reason is. And this is something that I thought was super fascinating that many people know, but I like to say it anyway, is that when social exclusion happens, it shares the same neural pathway as physical pain.
Mm.
Isn't that powerful? I mean, so literally, culture matters, and social, we've all had experiences of feeling outside of the in whatever it is, And so again, it doesn't have to be a skin color, a gender based or whatever. It's a human thing. And just recognizing that, how we're treating people really does make a difference in our wellness, in our health, you know? And so as Tracie is coming from the lens of like love and like creating conversation, I'm partnering and coming from a place of let's bring some healing to our bodies, to ourselves too, increase our capacity, you know, and have that awareness of what's happening to our nervous system, to our bodies when we're triggered, and having emotional agility. You know, our emotions are basically energy, you know, and so when it gets blocked, here comes anxiety, here comes depression, here comes all the different things, and it's exhibited in our bodies, you know, which is why I in the burnout recovery process that I support people in organizations is always an embodied practice, because our lived experience remains in our bodies, you know, and we express it all the time with our words, you know, our emotions. It's like pain in the neck, felt sick to my stomach. Those are emotions, but they're coming out in physical traits, you know. So the burnout recovery also is not just head knowledge, like, or go on vacation, you know, but what happens when you get back? You know what I mean? If you get back and the treadmill is just as fast and just as furious, you know, that's why I talk about integrating the wellness into the culture, because I can't just be for a month or a week of focus on mental health week or month or whatever, you know? And so I think it's just really important to recognize always looping in the human centered, the people factor, because we all, you know, if you cut us open, we bleed the same, period. You know, I have yet to find any study that says that the exterior is going to change what the interior looks like of a human being, you know? And so I think it's important that we actually recognize that, as well as our differences, you know? And one of the things, I love nature, and I just find it super interesting, is that trees, for example, they thrive in a diverse culture in different species of trees, you know. So when it's all homogenous, you know, they thrive also in growing really closely together. But the interesting thing is, underground, their roots are completely connected, interconnected, and it's like an amazing support system. You know what I mean? So they actually can tell if like there's a tree that's starting to wilt, they'll send the energy over and the nutrients or whatever to that tree through the root system. And they're diverse different trees because they have different properties and healing properties and survival techniques. And so they thrive in the diversity because they're able to support one another through the different aspects of what they bring based on their particular species of trees, you know? So
Wow, Michelle, let's pause on that for a minute and think about how can we apply that to organizational culture. And this whole concept that if I'm thriving, that doesn't mean that you're not thriving, or if you're thriving, that doesn't mean that I'm not thriving, but that we, in order to thrive, we all got to thrive together. And we're all going to go through those times when we're wilting, and we need to send that energy over to, and then there'll be a time when we need that energy sent over to us.
And even if we even take that into like our familial relationships, right? Because sometimes, so most people who follow me in any way know this about me, that I've been married and divorced twice, right? So I can tell you a whole bunch about what not to do in a marriage. But oftentimes people give you the false thinking that marriage is 50-50, right? It's not, though, right? It's 100-100. Everybody's got to bring their whole self all the time, right? But the beauty of having a partner is that when one of you is wilting, the other one can send that energy, right? So it's not just in our like big in our organizational spaces, but also within our family constructs, right? Anything that we learn about how people relate to one another in a business capacity can be narrowed down to how we deal with our families and vice versa.
Yeah, you know, and I'm thinking about the school system. So much of our school system is, oh, I want what's best for my child, and I'm going to advocate and fundraise and support and talk to teachers and do whatever I can to get what's best for my child. Well, what is actually best for your child is to be in a system that is optimal for all children, that's allowing all children to thrive, because your child is going to be surrounded by other children who are also thriving. That is going to be better for everyone than having one or two children who are like, you know, getting everything and everybody else is not. So yeah, so anyway, I'm not doing a good job of
No, you're doing a great job. And I think when you were talking about that, Karen, what flashed in my mind was a fourth grade Tracie.
Mm.
When I was in fourth grade, my father found out that there was a school where the smart kids go.
Mm.
And, you know, different programs have different names, right? In Houston, there's a Vanguard program. I think that's national, right? There's Vanguard schools. There's magnet programs. There's international baccalaureate, you know, you name it, right? The schools where the smart kids go. And so he found a school where the smart kids go, and he said his daughters were going to go to the school with the smart kids, right? So I remember being in the car with him, driving to the school because we had to take a test to get into this school. And he's like, okay, you got to take the test. Can you pass the test? And I was like, yes, I can pass the test. As a fourth grade Tracie, yes, I can pass the test. And my father said to me on that day, and why it's still stuck in my head, I don't know, but I love my daddy. He's my favorite human. And he said, all of life is passing tests.
Mm.
And so every day you get to decide, can you pass the test? And so to your point about what is best for your child is being in an environment where everybody is successful. My father knew that when I was in the fourth grade, right? Like, let me put my children, because my sister went to the same school. Let me put my children in a space where all the children get an equal shake. Mm-hmm. Right? And if we could replicate that in our public school environments more often, and not just in the spaces where the smart kids are, right? Because we're all smart kids. All the school I left was full of smart kids, right? It just wasn't labeled that way.
Yes. I fundamentally believe that every single one of us has unique knowledge and skills, and that the responsibility of the public education system is to help us develop those things so that we can each be the fullest expression of who we are and connect deeply with our purpose, and provide us with the experiences and networks that are going to allow us to become the fullest expression of who we are. I'm very into Ubuntu, and like, I cannot be who I am without you being
who you are. Yeah.
Who you are. Exactly.
Yeah.
We do have a question here I'd like to pose. Andrea, thank you for joining us, Andrea. So good to see you. She asks, generational trauma for white people, what does that look like?
Anybody want to take a stab at
it? Well, the first thing that, first, thank you for the question. I'm not going to say that I have a background in generational trauma. As a burnout recovery coach and consultant, I focus more on the human aspect, but what I want to say is I think it looks the same for anybody, really. You know, excuse me, Karen, I believe that you touched on it in terms of like the historical aspect of things. What trauma looks like in a person's body is the same across the board. It's the reasons why that are different. So, you know, in terms of trauma, it really does depend on the actual trauma. Historically speaking, again, Karen, you spoke to some of the reasons why your trauma would be different than Tracie or my trauma, you know, generationally speaking. How it exhibits is individual, but also in terms of systemic, in terms of like our belief systems, our sense of urgency, you know, I mean, that is considered like white supremacy, and that goes more into, you know, like a different realm in terms of out of my realm as far as wellness, but it does impact a person's body. But just also that sense of perfectionism,
Mm.
not good enough. The self-talk, a lot of it is, some that can be trauma based, never being good enough, and also, especially for women, there's also a certain type of generational trauma that happens based on gender too. And so really it's true, it has lots of different veins and ways. But I wanted to say, as far as for white, Black, Hispanic, whatever the person's identity may be, when it comes to the human body, it's going to exhibit the same way. It's just the reason why that's going to be the difference. And that's also, I'm not saying that's scientific. I'm believing that's actually true.
Yeah.
But again, I just want to humbly say that this isn't my area of expertise. It's just simply what I'm working with people. I see the same kind of responses regardless of their ethnicity. And I hope that answered your question a little bit. I'm open to other answers, obviously, but that's the answer I can offer.
So, Andrea, I would direct your inquiry to the work of Resma Menakem, who Karen mentioned earlier in her introduction. He does specialize in trauma, and he does specific coaching for people in what he calls bodies of culture, so Black bodies and brown bodies, and separate, different coaching for people in white bodies. Because he explains in his work that that the trauma does manifest itself differently because of how it got there, right? And so so I would, rather than me trying to answer your question, I would direct you to Resma Menakem, and his book, My Grandmother's Hands, is an excellent starting space to learn more about how trauma might show up in and manifest itself through bodies that were born differently.
Yes, and I believe I'm a graduate of Resma Menakem's Foundations of Somatic Abolitionism course, and I
took that course also.
Yes, I highly, highly recommend taking that course. He also does an in-person workshop at Omega Institute in October. I did it last year. Transformational. I highly recommend, and that's for bodies of culture as well as for white-bodied people.
Yeah.
I highly, highly, highly recommend both.
Yeah, I think he also has added police bodies, which I think is an interesting distinction. And so absolutely check out his work. And I want to circle back, if we can, for a minute, Karen, to your earlier question about how do we step in? How do we interrupt these cycles? And there's two things. One that I use all the time in my work, and another one that I'm just sort of toying with. So I want to share them both.
Yes.
The first is the guidelines that I have for authentic conversation, which is love. And it's, I'm an acronym girl, so just be in that space with me. So love stands for listen with your heart. It used to just say observe your bias. Then I switched it to own your bias. And recently I've added own your bias, judgments, and shame, because those three things almost always come up when we're having some sort of a difficult conversation about race or anything else. And so not just noticing that they're there, but leaning into them, owning them, and calling them out when you feel safe to do that. V is venturing into unfamiliar territory, which back to Michelle's point about curiosity, right? Like that's where we lean into our curiosity about how we got here, about why I might be feeling the way I'm feeling, about why you might be feeling the way you're feeling, and expressing that in words and not just inside our minds. And then the E in the LOVE acronym stands for expect the best, right? Because often we come into these spaces, we're having these dialogues with folks, and we are already tense from here up.
Yes.
Right? Because we just know it's going to go terribly. We've already made up our minds that this is going to be hard, that I don't want to do it, and that the outcome is going to be awful. Right? So maybe if we didn't start there, maybe if we backed up like a half a step and just said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go into this with an open mind and an open heart. And I'm just going to prepare that what's happening on the other side of this is going to be good.
Because it is going to be good.
Because it is going to be good. It is going to be good. Now, good is nuanced, right? Good is subjective, but it's going to be good on the other side. And we will get to the other side. It's not going to kill us to have this conversation. Whatever the conversation is you're not going to die from having the conversation, right? And some days that might be as good as it can get, right? That's the best. I didn't die.
So I would love to hear about your partnership and what you are bringing together to organizations.
Sure. So I kind of fell backwards into this work through hosting an event called 100 Voices, which is on my shirt today. Shameless plug. And 100 Voices is an opportunity for people of varying backgrounds to come together and have a shared experience about their lived experience in the space of race and culture. And for most of the calendar year 2020 and part of 2021, we did these conversations in different cities around the country and through different organizations, mostly by invitation. And even though the very first one was hosted just as a love letter to my city, Houston, it became something that people sought on the heels of the murder of George Floyd. And so we spent a year and some change doing those in various places. And so in 2023, I'm very excited to be able to bring back 100 Voices as a series of industry-specific conversations so that people within a particular industry can share their lived experience around race and culture as it relates to them as individuals and as it relates to them as part of this collective industry. And so there'll be 6 of those starting in January with healthcare. And Michelle is coming along board to partner with those same organizations to share her burnout work.
Yes, exactly. So, as you've probably heard by now, there's a lot of alignment in terms of our philosophy, in terms of how to support people in this work. And again, for me, my support aspect is to create the capacity for people to actually be able to fully engage and sustain the work that's being done. And as a wellness coach, I really want people to recognize their burnout, and support them in that, and recognize that it's not just about, again, going on vacation, going to bed early, which are great things. However, is that sustainable? Is that going to be actually what's going to resolve the burnout? So what I'm bringing to this project with Tracie is an opportunity for organizations to have the opportunity to learn about burnout resources and tips that are going to be more sustainable, so that they can also bring back to their organization. So part of this project is that the people who attend, the organizations that attend, they bring back the 100 Voices platform to their organization so that they can actually facilitate within their own organizations. Along with that is bringing capacity. So when a person or organization signs up for the program, they also get an hour workshop with me on burnout recovery and support, empowering resilience, so that they get a chance to actually build up their people, resource their people, empower their resilience, and build up that capacity so that when they engage in the work that Tracie's bringing, there's more spaciousness for it. There's more ability to be fully more engaged and more present, because they're not just so burned out and fried. It's like, okay, yeah, another thing, but it's like, oh, okay, there's actually some support here. So it's sort of like a wellness support along with the actual program that Tracie's bringing.
I love it. I love, 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 love it, because we need that, right? In order to not dread the conversation, or to come into the conversation with so much apprehension that this is going to be a disaster and end terribly, we need to take care of ourselves so we can be fully present.
Absolutely. And, honestly, sorry to cut you off. A lot of times that's why people are responding that way, just like that, what Tracie is describing as the shoulders and the tension, because they're emotionally burnt out. And the idea of engaging in something where they have very little bandwidth or emotional capacity to engage in something that is perceived and can be very challenging when there's already emotional burnout, there's just no spaciousness and capacity to really fully engage. It's just like coming in already armored,
Yeah.
and that armor is necessary for a sense of safety and survival, because a person may be so burnt out, they need that to protect themselves, because without that, they're too burnt out. They're too, I don't know, reactive or whatever. So it's just like, okay, they'll just stay armored instead and come, ready, So that really is something that I really like to help people understand regarding the burnout aspect. So when I'm talking about capacity, that's an example of the capacity. You know what I mean? That person starts to recognize, oh, they're feeling emotionally burnt out. Here are some tools and resources that will help support them in that. And so that they can actually be more engaged and able to hear and receive and be curious about what Tracie's bringing, or whatever, even their organization showing up to the next meeting. So they're not feeling like, ugh, because that tension goes across the board. Home, relationships, work, whatever it is, that burnout is in the body.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I know that people are maybe over Zoom, right? Because we're like, everybody's ready to go back outside. We outside. But in order to reach the most people and to make this as accessible as possible to organizations throughout the country, so you do get a good cross-pollination of people who are not just in your city, but across the country, that we are doing this virtually. So the 100 Voices conversations will be held virtually. Michelle's sessions will also be held virtually. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I'm excited to bring the conversations back, and also to create space that is both safe and brave for people to enter into with their colleagues, right? Because we spend a lot of time working together, and we're focused on the work, right? But if we don't also focus on the ways we live with one another, then it makes the work more difficult, right? And I really dislike the idea of having to create a business case for humanity. However, we spend a lot of time in business classes. My undergraduate degree is in business administration, and my master's degree is in strategic communication and leadership. We spend a lot of time in those spaces talking about money, talking about finance, right? And it is my opinion that we don't spend enough time talking about people and talking about how to live and work well with one another. Across our differences and with our differences. And so I believe that if we don't treat our people as well as we treat our money, soon enough, we won't have either. So I'm hoping that people will see this as an opportunity to embrace how we treat our people and to build their own and their corporate capacity to do the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you both so much. As we start to wind down from this conversation, I would love to hear from you. If you could wave a magic wand and get white people to either start doing something or stop doing something, what would it be and why?
So taking a page from modern day, I would ask white people to stop laying down when it's our time to shine. Jimmy Kimmel, don't lay down in somebody else's spotlight. Move out the way and let other people shine.
That's a great question, Karen. That's a really great question. I would say that I feel like a lot of what Tracie's saying in terms of letting people shine, but also really just like it's okay for there to be differences. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable with differences. I think sometimes that discomfort is what causes the harm. Is just like it's the block, it's the behaviors that follow the discomfort. And following what Tracie said earlier, they'll be okay. In the 100 voices or whatever the situation be, a person won't die having these conversations. And I think that just recognizing that one's safety isn't in danger because of discomfort. Discomfort is not the same thing as danger. And so I would say that it's okay to feel discomfort when there's change, when it's a challenge, and it's not necessarily dangerous, and reminding us that we are all basically like interconnected back to those trees. We thrive in diversity. And it can feel uncomfortable when it's something really different. I feel uncomfortable. It's a human nature thing. And to recognize that discomfort is a human nature thing and not a dangerous thing.
Love it. Love it. How can people access your program?
The URL is 100, the number 100, voicesconvo.com. Let's see. Where can I put it so you can put it on the screen?
Here, I can put it right here. 100, the number.
100 voicesconvo.com.
Okay, I am going to put it on the screen here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Awesome. Thank you both so much for joining us. It has been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. And I urge everyone to go to this website, 100voicesconvo.com. I urge you to come back on September 22nd. Our guest is going to be Paul Kivel, and we're going to be talking about white Christian dominance. And what do we do to end white Christian dominance? And Tracie and Michelle, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
this
you
has
so
been
much,
so
Karen.
fun.
Appreciate you hosting.
Yes, my pleasure. Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye.